Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever, whatever time you are listening to us. Welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. We're here again for another chapter in the book by Eugene Peterson. Dee, could you hold up the book first so everyone can see, please? A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. That's the book we're going through. We're on chapter 6 today. Myself, John, and Darlene, we're here to share our thoughts, our reflections on this chapter. A very interesting one. It's based off of Psalms 124. Based off of Psalms 124. Dee, if you could read that for us, please, and then we can get stuck in with our thoughts.
Sure. If God had been for us all together now, Israel sing out. If God hadn't been for us when everyone went against us, we would have been swallowed up alive by their violent anger, swept away by the flood of rage, drowned in the torrent. We would have lost our lives in the wild raging water. Oh, blessed be God. He didn't go off and leave us. He didn't abandon us defenseless, helpless as a rabbit in a pack of snarling dogs. We've flown free from their fangs, free of their traps, free as a bird. Their grip is broken. We're free as a bird in flight. God's strong name is our help, the same God who made heaven and earth. Psalms 124.
Okay, so this is the chapter's pretty much based on that. I felt like this chapter was really him wrestling with the notion of suffering and of pain and the fact that life doesn't always go to plan. And I think he was trying to reconcile, or at least offer some kind of reconciliation between the pain that we face and the goodness of God, or the providence of God, whichever way you want to describe it. I found this chapter quite helpful to remind myself of what's my purpose, or at least what am I supposed to do in suffering. And I guess one of the main things that I felt he reminded us, is the notion that our job isn't necessarily to find ourselves fixing the scenario, or necessarily asking God to fix the scenario, but rather to recognize his presence and to witness about that. My problem with that is, in the moments where things get really, really bad, all I want God to do is to intervene and to do something physically in those instances. And sometimes I can easily find myself translating God's inaction as God's lack of care for my life. And I found that this chapter kind of covered a little bit of that. So he talks a little bit about his experience as a pastor, and sometimes I really do relate to him. Sometimes I feel like people come to me with their problems and they want me to be God's representative, to answer on behalf of God. Mm-hmm. And like I am the customer services rep who you have called in, and I'm here to apologize on behalf of him to let you know that compensation is on the way, and we're really sorry that your service is really bad. But I think the one quote that he says, I think on page 66, the proper work for the Christian is witness, not apology. And Psalms 124 is a model for that. So I think he explores witness and the notion of what it takes to stand up and to testify of God's goodness in the face of suffering. What pointed out for both of you in this particular chapter? Anything you want to bring out? Did this chapter sit well with you? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're partly right. It deals with situations in life that we all have to face, and he describes them as hazards. And I think the Christian life is a hazardous life, and I don't know why we continue to be so surprised by that, because it's stated fairly clearly in the Gospels. And we know we live in a world of sin, and there are all the evil forces that come with sin that are against us. And I think, I mean, he says this Psalm 124, is not about hazards, but about help, HELP. And I think that's interesting, because when you go back to the Psalm and you look at it, I mean, that's what it's about. It's not saying, like a lot of Psalms, why God, why, why me? And, why aren't you helping me? It's saying if God hadn't been there for us, then we would have been swallowed alive. And then he goes through this whole thing. And so it's a lot, in reflecting on this, at least for me, and I'm not saying I've reached this level of maturity for sure, but I think it's describing a level of maturity that you recognize that the world's full of problems, but you don't question God about those problems. You realize that God is there for you through all those problems, and even when you don't have those problems, and you have that faith to celebrate God, through thick and thin, so to speak, and regardless. And I guess that gets away from, what you were just saying, the customer service clerk that feels like they have to, do everything and defend God. He's not talking about that. The Psalm, at least he's saying, it sounds to me like, this is about God, and God is always there no matter what.
Do you think that Peterson was trying to advocate for us not trying to question God at all about the hazardous situation of humanity?
So I think what he's trying to get us to do is to not do that individually. We are not called upon individually to be apologetics to God and who he is and what he does. I think you can do that, and God certainly is going to understand better than anyone else. But I think what he's looking at is more of a community, that, and this is the Israelite community. He kind of references the Israelites coming back from Babylon and exile, and this is the song they sang to celebrate that. They weren't complaining that they were in exile. They weren't complaining about what had happened and what in either Babylon or Jerusalem while they were in exile. They were celebrating that God was still with them, and if he wasn't with them, they would have been completely destroyed. And I think we forget that the forces of evil we're up against are trying to completely destroy us. And I think when we have an opportunity, we will see a lot more of what God's done for us that we don't even realize. And we would probably be celebrating a lot more day by day, just to know that every day is a blessing and we're alive every day. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, it did. It did answer my question, but I have a few thoughts. But before I do that, Dee, did that resonate with you? Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I do appreciate how he took the focus away from the difficulties and the struggles and the bad things that occur in our life to focus on the help, that he is always there, and that he is going to be, be our help and not leave us defenseless. I appreciate the focus, but he does talk about that every day we are living with a risk. He says every day we put our faith and hope and love on the line. And if I really think about that, and I really am being very honest, I think that is true. I think that every time we choose to put our faith, love, and hope in God, it is taking a risk. But I think it's a taking a risk only, again, if you look at it from the perspective that somehow that every time you pray that God is going to come in and just sweep away all of the problems and difficulties. But if we look at it from the perspective that he's not going to ever leave us, that he's always going to be with us in every situation, then I think that I don't see it so much as a risk.
I think we have this deep expectation for God to come in and do something.
Definitely,
And
yeah.
anything outside of that is unacceptable in how we view things. There's a quote on page 69 where he says, every skeptical thought, every disappointing venture, every pain, every despair that we face is lived through and integrated into a personal saving relationship with God. And then he qualifies what that saving relationship looks like. He says a relationship that also has in it acts of praise, blessing, peace, security, trust, and love. Kind of tagging on the back of what John was saying in terms of community, like we've all experienced suffering in isolation. We know how painful that can be, living or kind of restricting yourself to yourself and not sharing with anyone, not diving into anything. It sends you into an emotional and even just a mental ill health spiral. And there's something about the nature of what it actually means to be in a saving relationship with God, which teaches you to ask different questions or have different methods when we respond to hazardous situations. The natural inclination is, I think back to some trivial things, to some really, really painful things in my life, but I even think back to some of the trivial things. Like, have you ever just walked into a room and the back of your shirt just gets caught on the doorknob? And it's, if you've got a short fuse like me, you sort of look back at the door. Why, Lord? Why does this have to happen? Like, what purpose does this serve? Like, how is, and I feel like there is a maturing process that takes place where you shift from asking the question why, and you move to how does one respond who is in a saving relationship with Christ. Now, I don't know the answer with the doorknob, but I with the ideas of hazardous things that happen in our lives, I think we're learning to just try and respond in a more adult Christian way. I don't know if I'm being clear or not. Do you guys get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I mean, because I have the same thing. It's like you have a bad day and then it doesn't take much to make it even worse. And when you look back, you wonder why it was even a big deal at all. But I think that's where, if the focus is on you and your bad day, you're losing focus on what the focus should be. And that is that even in a bad day, God is there and God is with you, probably more than you even realize. And I think we live in a society that is so busy in so many ways and hurried, and so it's that, getting stuck on the doorknob that is slowing you down. And the reality is it's all physics. It's not God. It's not the forces of evil necessarily. It's just your response to it.
Yeah. I think it boils down to selfishness and our inability to actually look at what God is doing in our lives versus what am I doing or aiming for to achieve. It's so easy to just lose ourselves into this is all me. I'm making this happen. And I think the perspective of a mature Christian, I talk to a lot of older people, elderly people, and I listen to their stories and stuff, and hear of, in my day this happened. And when you get to a certain age, there's a certain resolve that changes in many human beings. There's a sense of freedom and peace or carefree attitude that they have because they've lived through life having their seasons of repression, having their seasons of pain, and now their response to pain and suffering is actually, well, I'd like to think a lot of them is very, very different. Obviously, there are those who are deeply depressed, but there are a lot of individuals that I've met who are still at peace in their pain. And I think that's more beautiful than God removing the pain. Trying to take peace in it.
I wouldn't say that's everyone though, because there's certainly some very angry and frustrated older people.
Sure.
And so that's why I use the word maturity, because I think with some introspection and being proactive about making changes in your life, you can, and then obviously with God working with you with his spirit, I think that can move you away from yourself, which is selfishness. I mean, it's that inward looking to yourself and yourself always being the highest priority. I think you can get away from that and looking more towards God and towards other. And I like that section that Dee mentioned, putting faith on the line, hope on the line, love on the line. But the quote you reminded me of is on the last page, near the top. It says, Psalm 124 is an instance of a person who digs deeply into the trouble and finds there the presence of the God who is on her side. And so I think when bad things happen, we want to say, why, God, why? And you're making the assumption that God's not on your side. And God is on your side, regardless. And so I think, it takes a level of maturity to recognize God's on your side. And I love those people that are they have so much faith and they have so much trust in God that all kinds of stuff can happen. And they kind of keep that even keel that, at least the perception is that nothing seems to ruffle them. But, I'm sure even those people get ruffled, or if they don't get ruffled now, there was a time when they had to. I mean, almost all these people I've talked to, they'll tell you, well, yeah, I wasn't always that way. And I think that's God on their side, leading them to where they are.
Right.
In many ways.
Dee, are you someone who is ruffled very easily?
No, actually, I'm not at all. I'm not at all. I think it's something that I've always been that way.
You know why?
Why?
No, I'm asking you if you.
Oh.
I don't have the existential answers for your life.
Why am I like that? I think, well, okay, so outside of like faith and my spirituality and my relationship to God, outside of that, if I'm just purely focused on talking about my work, I think the reason is because I am so analytical that I'm able to work issues or whatever quite quickly and just be able to have a big picture and just work through it.
I'm very analytical, but I'm completely the opposite, very ruffled.
No, I don't. So people are always very surprised when things like, especially in emergency situations, or when you got on an annual basis would have this state inspections. They're in your facility for 7 to 10 days and they're just on top of you. And I'm just calm, and everyone just appreciate the fact that I am so calm. I'm not ruffled by it,
Okay, so let's move from professional to your personal life. How have you experienced your interactions with God through hazardous living?
I think that large part of it is the fact that I knowing that truly at the end of it, I really don't have control over any of this stuff. Yeah, I could try, and trust me, I try, but and I seldom ask the question why, because I think it is very, very unhelpful. In fact, it's it does you much more disservice than being helpful. But rather I really ask God, like, what can I learn from this experience, right? What can I learn from this situation so that I come out having more better experience with God, and that just become, I can grow deeper in my relationship with him. And I think what he says about, practicing being able to dig deeper, look more deeper inside of you, having more introspection, spending time on that is very important, because we tend to get so, again, like you guys talked about, so focused on the situation itself and trying to get out of it, that and even afterward, as soon as things start turning around and goes better, you're just left it behind you, and things that you could have gained from it, it's lost because you haven't spent the time. But I think as you go through the process and even afterward, is to really spending time and learning, like just really doing a deeper dive into it is very, very important. And always with, I think for me, for the attitude of just wanting to be humble and just learning from it.
I think this chapter is a reminder that God is not just present for celebration, but he's there. One final quote I'll share, it's towards the end, chapters, page 73. A look to the heavens can bring a breathtaking sense of wonder and majesty, and if a person is a believer, a feeling of praise to the God who made heaven and earth. This psalm looks the other direction. It looks into the troubles of history, the anxiety of personal conflict and emotional trauma, and it sees there the God who is on our side, God, our help. I need to remind myself God is here in the pain. And it begs the question, if I really want to remove the pain, I may not be able to experience God in the same way. Like this, I think one thing that needs to happen in the maturity version, a growth of a Christian, is the recognition that there's value in pain. It's painful, but there is value in pain, value that you could not get in any other way. It's the age-old story of, oh, you're stuck in traffic, and if only there wasn't traffic, you could get to where you need to get to on time. But God knew that if you'd have got there earlier, there was an accident that could have happened. It's the recognition that God is there doing something. I mean, you're asking him to do something. He's doing something, and he's there. And I think that recognition and reminder is so important. Any other thoughts as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think you nailed it on you came close to nailing it on head when you said experience God. But I think even more so, this psalm is about experiencing the help that God gives us. Okay. Whether we see it or not, it's a recognition of that help. And that's how he kind of ended the chapter. He said the last two sentences, it is Christ, not culture, that defines our lives, which I can easily agree with. And then the last sentence, it is the help we experience, not the hazards we risk, that shape our lives. And I think there may be two types of people in the world. There's people where the hazards shape their lives, and there's people where the help they experience shapes their lives. And I'm not sure if we consciously look at that as much as we should, but I think there is an opportunity for change. And maybe it's like you said, I mean, suffering and pain, at least some of it may be there for a reason, so that we can experience it when we might not otherwise experience it if we didn't have that suffering and pain.
I think that brings us to a powerful end. What shapes you? That's the powerful question right there. We want to thank you for joining with us on this chapter. We are reading the book by Eugene Peterson, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction by Eugene Peterson. Thanks, Steve, for holding it up. You can click the link in the description and you'll be taken to the book. Come with us on this journey. Next week, we are looking at the next chapter entitled Security. God encircles his people. And we'd love for you to join us and to offer your comments. But until now, this is John, Dee, and myself saying we shall see you next time for Pages to Progress. God bless you. Bye-bye.